It is great to be here. It's great to be with you. I spent a bit of time growing up in Aurora, high school, kind of grade 7, grade 8, and so it's always nice to come back to these parts and to drive around and clearly see how things have been changing over the years. The last number of years, I've been working in a church in Paris, Ontario, about an hour west of here. But I also involved in a prison ministry. I lived in Malawi for 4 years with my wife and our kids when they were little, and then we've been back in Paris. And we were living in Malawi from 2004 to 2007, and then from 2015 to 2016. And it was there that I got involved in the prison ministry. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. Actually, my mind, as I was watching the baptism of your son, I have to say, I've been involved in many, many baptisms, and that has to have been the most peaceful baptism I have ever witnessed. Some of my first baptisms that I was involved in Malawi were out in the rural villages. And I remember when I was helping and assisting, the look on these children's faces were sheer terror. They were like, what is that tall white dude about to do with cold water? And so to witness this, kind of a better way to roll, I think, absolutely. So it is great. But it's always a privilege to come and to be with congregations like yourself, congregations that have been supportive of the ministry that I'm involved in Malawi for a number of years. My conversations back and forth with Jeff, just hearing the way that and seeing the way that your congregation supports the prison ministry in Malawi through prayers, through the financial generosity. The things that we do in Malawi could not happen without individuals such as yourself. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with Malawi. It's in the southern part of Africa. Bigger countries surround it, Tanzania to the north, Zambia and Zimbabwe. Mozambique kind of wraps around it as well. It's a landlocked small country, but they have an incredibly high population. About 80% of Malawians are local subsistence farmers. And so essentially, they are able to survive off the small plot of land that they have. Unfortunately for Malawi, they are incredibly dependent upon weather patterns. And as we witness here in Canada, the changing weather patterns, they have significant ramifications for the people in Malawi. Unfortunately, Malawi is typically ranked as one of the top 10 poorest countries in the world. And so you can just begin to imagine what the conditions that many of Malawians face on a day-to-day basis. You can almost amp it up even more when you start to think of the situation in the prisons in Malawi. They're chronically overcrowded and underfunded. They lack the basic necessities of things that I know I often take for granted. Things like regular meals, medicine, soap, proper clothing, and footwear. Here's a picture of men in one of the cells of one of the prisons that we are involved in. So kind of put it in perspective a little bit, imagine like one of these sections right here, just the pew right here. This would be a typical cell for these men and women. They are locked in at about 4 o'clock at night, not released until 6 in the morning. I'm really given just 2 buckets, one with clean water to wash, and then the other is for waste. But in this one section here, there would be on average 50 to 60 men. Here is them attempting to sleep at night, and you can just see the congestion. You can just see the challenges and the difficulties that they face. And so we began ministry a number of years ago. Jump to the next slide, please. Currently, we're involved in 22 prisons in the south central part of Malawi. That covers both men, women, and children. Now, oftentimes people hear that like children. Wait a second, what are you talking about? But women, if they have been incarcerated and put in prison with little ones under the age of 4, because oftentimes there's not a means by which the family or the village can take care of the child. The child, there we go. The child also will go into the prison with the mother. And so part of our ministry, we also provide just basic things like diapers and formula for these little ones as well. And so this was a picture taken last year, and this is my team on the ground. On your left is the two Hastings, Leica, and then Rami. These are in many ways the superheroes of this ministry. They're the ones who are involved in going into the prisons to provide essentially two critical pieces of everything that we do. Maybe jump to the next slide. The first one is what we call just simply the ministry of presence, a word that was coined by a Catholic priest by the name of Henry Nouwen. One of the greatest concerns of these men and women in the prisons is that they will be forgotten. They feel as if they've been forgotten by their country, they've been forgotten by their family, and then ultimately it's not very difficult for them to make the leap to think that they too have been forgotten by God. And so what we do regularly in 22 prisons, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, depending upon the distance that we have to travel, we go in and we do basic Bible study. We have conversations. We spend time in prayer. Just trying to convey the message that they matter to God. That God continues to love them in spite of what their past may say. The second thing we do is we provide basic necessities. Things such as soap, such as medicine, such as footwear, just the things that so often I can take for granted. We provide them based upon the need within the prisons. And it's been amazing to see what started in what I would suggest a very subtle way, God has blessed and God has used to continue to impact. We're in contact with over 4,800 men and women every month through this prison ministry. I'm sure for all of us, we all land at a similar place. Regardless of how old, regardless of how young, regardless of even what you believe when it comes to God, I think we all hold this core truth. We want to make a difference. We want to make a difference perhaps in the lives of our family. We want to make a difference in our community. We want to make a difference in the places that we work. We want to make a difference. We want our lives to count for something. And you know the amazing thing is that God shares that value as well. That He wants to use you regardless of who you are, regardless of where you are, regardless of how old or how young. He wants to use you to make a difference. The question is, how does that begin to happen? What I have learned primarily through the ministries in prisons in Malawi is that oftentimes God uses us to make a difference when we respond to this subtle nudge. I don't know if you've ever been there. Have you been in a place where maybe someone has come to mind or maybe a situation has presented itself and it seems perhaps at times like, could I really make a difference in this? Or do I have enough time? Or do I have the skills, or do I have the ability? Like it kind of almost passes you by so quickly, and if you don't take notice, it can be so easily missed. But I am convinced that when we look around at the world, when we look at what God teaches us in the Bible, that the way that He often uses us to make the greatest differences is when we respond to the nudge. I want to turn it back to that passage in John chapter 6. And we just kind of read the very beginning of it because I believe this is one example of many in the Bible where God uses a nudge of a couple of His disciples to do something absolutely incredible. And so to set the context a little bit for you, it's early on in Jesus' ministry. Jesus has been teaching and performing these incredible miracles. It's so much so that people just want more. And so Jesus actually tries to get away from the crowd a little bit, and the crowd is like, we are having absolutely none of this. We have heard and we have seen what this Jesus can do, and we want to see more. And so they're so excited that they get up and they begin to follow Jesus. And so Jesus, as He typically does, has compassion upon them, and He begins to teach them. And so let me pick up where we left off in John chapter 6, beginning in verse 5. It says, Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for Him. And so turning to Philip, He asked, where can we find bread to feed all these people? You see, this was a place where the people were so excited, were so interested, that they didn't plan for the day.
Have you ever done that? You leave the house, you think, I'm going to be gone for a little bit, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe a few hours, and you don't really plan for the day. You don't like pack a lunch, you don't pack a snack, you don't bring the necessary things, and then you just get caught up in the activities of the day, and you realize that you didn't bring everything you needed. Well, this was the case on that day with those following Jesus. They left their homes, and nobody brought enough food. And they had been with Jesus the entire time. And so Jesus turns to Philip, one of his disciples, and he asks, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. And then Philip replied in a way that I would probably have replied, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd? Jesus says, tell everyone to sit down. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, he gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. And I just want to stop there because I think this is one of the perfect examples of how Jesus uses a subtle nudge to see who is willing to join him. I mean, this story, we can so quickly kind of run through the details and get to the end and think, wow, that was amazing. Jesus fed like thousands and thousands of people. But I think one of the best ways we learn from reading the Bible is when we don't keep it at arm's length, but we start to see ourselves in the story. And so imagine you're downtown Toronto and Scotiabank Centre has just let out for the Raptors game. I could have used the Leafs, but I'm not a Leafs fan, so I don't want to go there. So the Raptors have just let out, and there is 17,000 people streaming out onto the streets, and none of them have eaten all day. And they're looking to you for food. I mean, that's precisely the situation that Jesus and his disciples found themselves in. See, oftentimes we refer to this as the feeding of the 5,000, but that's an undershot. The 5,000 was just the men that were there. There would have been women. There would have been children. And so imagine 15 to 20,000 people, and Jesus turns to you, you're Philip, and is like, where shall we find bread to feed all these people? You know a couple things. One is it's Jesus, and you can't flat out say no to Jesus. And so what do you often do when you feel overwhelmed and you don't really want to say no? You get a little bit more creative. You start looking around and thinking, well, Jesus, even if we worked for months, even if we worked for 8 months, we still wouldn't have enough to even buy bread. Philip's probably thinking, why don't you send them home, send them back to where they came from, let them sort themselves out. I think it's often in these places, in moments where we may feel overwhelmed, places where we want to make excuses, that God is almost nudging us to see, will we join with him? You see, one of the great realities of God is that he values partnership. He loves partnering with his people, not just simply to get things done, but to build relationship with us as well. I mean, we see it throughout the Bible. We jump all the way back to the very beginning in the book of Genesis. After God had created the heavens and the earth, he'd put the birds in the air, he'd put the fish in the sea, he put the animals on the land. And the very first thing he does is when he turns to Adam, is he's like, guess what? I've got a job for you. You are going to name all these animals. Could you imagine again if you're Adam there for a moment? You're thinking, this sounds amazing. I don't know what to call any of them, but I get to be creative. And so suddenly the first animal comes out of the water, and it is this massive, massive creature. It is huge. And he looks at it and he thinks, I got to be creative. I mean, God has asked me to do this. So I'm going to call this one, like a hippopotamus. What do you think? We good? Yeah, okay. Next animal. Next animal shows up, and it's like this massive creature with this huge neck, and it's eating the leaves from the tree. And Adam is like, okay, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this like, I don't know, like a giraffe. We'll go with giraffe, right? Now, I can only imagine that after days of having to name all the animals, this is just purely my opinion, not biblically based at all, Adam got a little bit bored. Why? Because he saw animals come out, he's like, I'm going to call that a dog. I'm going to call that a cat. Let's move it along, right? But you see from the very beginning, God values partnership. You see, Jesus wasn't putting Philip on the spot. He wasn't saying, hey, Philip, where will you find bread to feed all these people? He says, where shall we find bread? And John tells us Jesus already knew what he had in mind. You see, oftentimes when God nudges us into new opportunities that may even seem overwhelming, it's an invitation to join with him to do something incredible. I remember in 2016, when we were living in Malawi, we were involved in two prisons that were locally based. And I knew that in a matter of about 4 months, we'd be returning back to Canada. And one of my team members, Rami there on the left, came up to me and he said, Abusa is pastor in the local language, Chichewa. He's like, Abusa, I have a wonderful idea. And so, of course, I said, okay, let's hear a little bit more. He's like, I think we should start visiting 2 more prisons. And I'm like, Rami, that is a wonderful idea. But now let me tell you all the challenges that they present. In a matter of months, I'll be returning to Canada and will no longer have a vehicle. We don't even have a budget. We don't have funds even available to really do the ministry we're already doing. And Rami took a moment and he smiled and he says, why don't we try and see what God is going to do? You see, the amazing thing about this story of the feeding of the 5,000 was it didn't end with Philip's reluctance. You see, there was another disciple, a disciple by the name of Andrew, who must have been seeing what was going on and hearing the conversation. And Andrew scanned the crowd and found that there was one boy in the group that must have had a phenomenal mom. Because no matter where the boy was going, food went with him. And Andrew found this boy with this little lunch. And it wasn't a lot. It was a little bit of fish and a little bit of bread. Like a McHappy meal from McDonald's in a contemporary context. And almost reluctantly, Andrew brings this boy's lunch and almost apologetically says to Jesus, here's a little bit of food, but how far will this go amongst so many? You see, one of the amazing things is that when we begin to see these nudges of God's, not as being an obstacle, but an opportunity, we recognize that any gift, any life, when placed in the hands of Jesus, is significant. Because what did Jesus do? He took this little boy's lunch, he blessed it, he broke it, they distributed it amongst the people. And not only did they have enough to eat, like this wasn't a crowd just being polite, looking around and thinking there's not enough here to go around. There were leftovers. This is just one example yet again of the incredible things that God is inviting us into when he nudges us. Even oftentimes when he places obstacles before us so that we begin to realize that this is not something that I can do on my own. You see, when it comes to the prison ministry, I am more like Philip. I see the problems, I see the obstacles, but thankfully God has equipped me with a bunch of Andrews, individuals who see incredible opportunity. Back to the story, in 2016, we started visiting 4 more prisons. I returned back to my congregation in Canada, convinced our national church to allow me to spend more time with our team in Malawi, convince our congregation. We had no budget. We had no idea what was going to happen. Fast forward another 6 years. We're now at a place where we are involved in 22 prisons. 4,800 men and women and children that we have an impact with day by day, week by week. We see congregations like yourself support this ministry faithfully, whereas now we have a budget of $100,000 a year to help equip and help these men and women. Thankfully, I have people who want to take steps of faith, who want to step out and see what God is continuing to do. It doesn't mean that there are no more obstacles. It doesn't mean that there are no more difficulties. But we continue to look at the obstacles as ways in which God is nudging us, presenting us with opportunities to partner with Him. COVID was another one of those obstacles. During COVID, we were unable to physically go into the prisons. And so as a part of us to think, well, what's going to happen with our ministry? And so what we began to do is we began to write out Bible studies and equip them and send them into the prisons so that the men and women inmates would start to lead the Bible studies themselves. Remarkably, our ministry grew in ways I have never seen. We have seen more people come to faith in the last 2 years than in the previous 10 years of this ministry. It's been absolutely amazing. And suddenly our eyes were open that maybe we were on to something. Maybe just jump to the next slide. And so we started doing theological training and education within the prisons. We have a 1-year cohort where they take 17 different lessons, where they learn about theology, they learn about Bible, they learn about evangelism, they learn about discipleship. And we started with our first cohort of 13 men and women, all with the hope that as we better train and equip them, they will help our ministry in the prisons, but then also upon their release, they could potentially be of help to congregations as well. Just jump to the final slide. Here's Hastings. He was a man that was sentenced to 10 years in prison. When he entered into prison, he had no time or desire to know God. But it was through our prison ministry that Hastings became a follower of Jesus, committed his life to Him, took the very same vows, similar vows that you heard spoken and taken here today. Hastings was the first part of our leadership training cohort 3 years ago. 2 years ago, he was released from prison. He went through a 4-month mentorship program with another one of our team members. And last year, I had the privilege of going into prisons with Hastings as one of our team leaders. He would share his story of transformation, of how God got a hold of him. And the other men, as they listened, were just drawn to this story of hope. I'm reminded over and over again that God desires to make a difference in our lives. God desires to make a difference in the communities in which we live. And one of the greatest ways He does that is by nudging us into places of partnership. And so thank you. Thank you for responding to the nudge of God to partner with the ministry of prisons in Malawi. You are helping us plant seeds of hope. If you want kind of more information, I got some cards out there. I also brought a little gift from Malawi. I brought some bookmarks that are made in Malawi. And if you want to take one for your family, please feel free. And as you take it, maybe just use it as a reminder to be praying for the work that we are doing. But I hope this is also an encouragement to you to be aware of the ways that God is nudging you in your life, in your relationships, within this church, within your community. You see, God has placed you somewhere for a reason and with a purpose. And that is to build his kingdom. Remember, no gift of time, of ability, of resources is insignificant when placed in the hands of Jesus. What I have to ask myself is when God nudges me, is will I respond like Philip or Andrew? When we respond like Andrew, we see Jesus do incredible things, not only in us, but through us. Let me pray for all of you. Gracious God, thank you again for this day. Thank you for the way that you work in this world and in our lives. I thank you for this celebration of baptism, for this family coming forward and saying, Jesus, we want to follow you. I pray your blessing would be upon them. I give thanks for the work of this congregation here in the community of Nobleton. I thank you for the ways that they are reaching out and having an impact. God, may you continue to encourage them. And I pray for all of us in this room, no matter how old, no matter how young, no matter how much we know of the Bible or not at all, that we'd be aware of the way that you nudge us, that you push us into places to see if we will join with you to make a difference in building your kingdom here on earth. And so we ask all this, Jesus, in your name. Amen.